the kind of person that loves to blur the lines between adventure and adrenaline on a motorcycle that's just at home, smashing through twisty mountain passes as it is munching miles on the motorway, chances are you're going to love Triumph's new sports touring proposition. Of course, I'm talking about the new Tiger Sport 800, which is set to lift that sector massively this year thanks to a raft of updates off of the proven platform of the Tiger Sport 660. As similar as the two machines look, there are so many significant differences between the two models, with this latter iteration taking the performance, the sophistication, I guess the maturity and capability of the bike to a whole new level. Having just got back from Portugal, where I tested the bike in biblical rain and beautiful dry roads as well, I've got a proper good grasp of what it has to offer, and I want to go through all of that with you. But before we get into the riding experience, it's time to talk about the tech. The most significant difference between this and its smaller sibling is, of course, the capacity, which now sits at 798cc. Powers up by around 42%, meaning you've got about 113 brake horsepower, and torque sits at 82 Newton meters. It's a potent motorcycle that's ideal for people that want a bit more than what the 660 with its kind of A2 eligible characteristics could offer. Squint from 20 yards away and you would kid yourself that the engine in this bike is the same as the one in the 660. Size-wise, the proportions are very similar. Yes, there are certain giveaways like different crankcases and whatnot, and with the new exhaust system that comes on the Tiger 800, which is rear-mounted instead of underslung like on the Tiger 660, you can split the difference between the two very easily. But what you won't be able to tell are all the changes that have gone into the engine themselves. So everything from the valves to the cylinder head, the clutch, and even the gear ratios are different to that of the 660. In fact, it's different to anything else in Triumph's range. There's no crossover with this motor with anything else yet in Triumph's range. But watch this space because it's a fantastic engine, and I dare say that Triumph in due course will be making the most of it in some of their other to-be-released motorcycles. You get the gist. The engine has been given a good seeing to. It's not the most powerful in class, when it's up against the likes of Yamaha's Tracer 9, but we were told by Triumph that during roll-on tests in top gear that the Tiger Sport 800 actually beat its rival. So make of that what you will. We haven't been able to prove that, but if they're saying it, I imagine it did happen. So don't write this bike off based on numbers alone. But what I want to do first is tell you about some of the other big changes to this bike. So technologically, the game has also moved on. So we've now got cornering ABS, cornering traction control, cruise control. There's a shifter and blipper too, as well as optional heated grips if you want to go down that route. Okay, so now it's time to talk about the elephant in the room. Of course, I'm referring to the dash. It's not the sexiest of propositions. You compare it to pretty much anything out there, even from Triumph's own range, with like the Street or the Speed or whatever, the Tiger 12. We know what Triumph can offer, but they built this bike to a budget. They wanted it to be competitive, and being realistic, this was the best proposition that they could put on this bike that did all that you could ask of it on the price that they had to spend. It's a shame, but it is what it is. And actually, when you're riding it, I will say this, that not only is the display easy to kind of read, but the systems that work around it, the architecture of the electronics, they all work just fine. So on this motorcycle, you have 3 different riding modes. You've got rain, road, and sport. Touch of a button, again, similar to other Triumph switch gears, and you're quickly flicking through the maps and able to decide on which setup you want. You can also go into the display and change a multitude of other features. You can also, completely switch off traction control if you don't want that on there. Obviously ABS, cornering ABS more to the point. It's there whether you like it or not. It's a permanent passenger, if you like. Trying to put their money in other areas. So areas such as the suspension on the bike, shower units front and rear, fully adjustable forks, and likewise at the rear too, with a remote preload adjuster. And it's decent level suspension. So like I say, what do you want? Do you want a bike that handles, or do you want a bike that looks nice when you look down at that dash? You've got to make a choice. Triumph have done it. It is what it is. It will either work for you or it won't. Another key upgrade is the fitment of radial calipers instead of the actual units found on the 660. The bike is fitted with Michelin Power Road tyres, and if you want to take your touring to the next level, there is going to be a GT spec version of this bike that basically means you get a top box and panniers, so you can lug as many pairs of underpants as you want around with you anywhere. So that should give you a good overview of what the 800 is like and how it compares to that 660. It's been heavily refined. It's more of an evolution than a revolution. And I guess the reason for that is that Triumph's been onto a good thing. The 660 has been a massive seller for them. Tens and tens of thousands of units have left the factory floor. And the intention is that this is going to be just as big a hit. They worked really hard on that budget. They worked really hard on developing the bike in areas that it needed it without getting carried away and kind of lost in the hype of what some people might like versus what some people want. Or at least that was the message we had. The question was, how would that translate to riding? Fast forward to the riding experience, and unfortunately, I'm waking up, opening the curtains, I realized that Portugal was being hit by biblical rain, and my enthusiasm for getting out there in it wasn't exactly bouncing off the limiter, but we had riding to do nonetheless. So quick flick through of the bike into rain mode, nice and easy to adjust, screen into its highest position, bin bags on my feet to try and keep them dry, and off we went into the Algarve. Fast forward 30 miles. And I was grateful that we'd rolled the dice, we'd got stuck in, we'd clocked those miles, because I had an appreciation for the bike, which I just wouldn't have learned otherwise. So the thing I really want to labor on now is just how smooth and fantastic the throttle connection is on this motorcycle. So speaking with Triumph's chief engineer about the mapping and how hard those guys had worked on it, in essence, they couldn't have achieved what they have if they hadn't gone down the triple throttle body route. And what they have done is just remarkable. The connection from the throttle to the rear wheel is seamless, super, super smooth, and the power delivery is just clinical. It's so predictable. I mean, you've got all the excitement of a triple motor, but just the way that that power comes through, it's creamy. It's exactly what you need in conditions like that. When you're on a road tire, on slick roads, and you're being egged on by your peers around you, you need the bike to look after you that bit more. And I will say that in rain mode, I was also pleasantly surprised by how permitting it was. So the back end of last year, I was out riding Triumph's Speed Twin 1200. For context, rain mode on that thing was anything other than what I'd actually choose from a motorcycle. But in rain mode on the Tiger Sport 800, it was just so much more liberal. I knew it was there. I could see TC flashing up every now and again when I got a little bit greedy with the throttle, but otherwise it kind of allowed me to play. I had complete faith in the system. It's an area of the bike I could wax lyrical about all day, but I'm not going to. Needless to say, the fueling was spot on. And that's the same way I described the quick shifter and the blipper as well. Really, really quick and efficient, super seamless and dependable with every touch in either direction. Loved it. However good I thought that engine was in the wet, in rain mode, with it in sport, it took on a whole new identity. Just so vibrant, just so dependable, lots of power, not overwhelming. I mean, it was one of those engines that's just fun to ride, where you feel like you're the boss of it rather than it bossing you around. But it was a great motor. It didn't matter what gear I was in. Felt like I always had drive, always had punch. I didn't have to look down at that scrawny dash to kind of work out what gear I was in. Nothing was subjective like that. You could just roll on and the motor would come to life. It also sounded fantastic. So you can get an optional Akrapovic system on the Tiger, but I will say that even in stock format, the exhaust note was brilliant. The induction noise was exciting. It just befitted the character of the machine. It was playful. It wanted to kind of egg you on into going faster and harder. And we were really getting a lick on later on in the day. So by midday, the roads were completely dry. And that's when I got a proper grasp of how well this bike handles. So despite the fact it's got the long travel suspension and it weighs in at 214 kg, it's surprisingly agile. It's nimble, you can chuck it around, it's quite planted, it's got that typical plush Triumph feel to it. They've done a great job in dialing in the Showa suspension, so fair play Triumph. But at the same time, there's lots of information that comes back from the bike as well. And because of that long travel suspension, when you really are cracking on, you make those units work pretty damn hard, especially from the front, you know, when you're plowing on deep into an apex with the thing on its side, or snatching away at the throttle to kind of power out of a bend. There is a little bit of movement there, but it's not alarming movement. It's just the bike, I guess, showing the reality of the setup that it's got. I quite liked that. I liked the feel it had on tap, and I also liked how this bike cut in and out of corners. It was just effortless, not as agile as a Street Triple, but way better than a Tiger 9 for context. In fact, this bike is almost that perfect blurring of the line of the two things. It's got the all-day practicality of a Tiger 9, but also that fun edge of a Street Triple. It is neither of those two propositions. It's its own entity. But that's what makes it so good, because being realistic, some people want that. Other areas that impressed, well, the braking performance. So I could get the ABS kicking in, but I had to squeeze pretty damn hard on that lever to make it happen. As for the traction control, yeah, again, it was one of those things that, you know, it was something that I knew about and it would kick in every now and again. What I'd say was there's a bit of inconsistency with the system. Sometimes it would kick in and you wouldn't really tell that it was kicking in. At other times it was hard hitting and it felt like someone was pulling you by your G-string.
I'm leaving that in.
But overall, the tech on the bike was really good. And actually, the more I rode it, the more I realized that the dash was less relevant. I wasn't kind of so worried about the look of that dash. I didn't need to look at the dash. When I was in the right mode, when I was in the right gear, I didn't really have anything to learn from it. Interestingly, you know, the way I knew I needed to change gear wasn't by looking for the revs on the display. It was from hearing the awesome sounding limiter say, you've had your lot, switch up a gear and go again. And that's exactly what I did. By the end of the day, I clocked 150 miles on the bike. And throughout the course of that period, I'd experienced so many different sides to this motorcycle. I learned to like it for lots of different reasons. It's that Swiss Army knife of motorcycling. It's that versatile, usable, practical, yet fun proposition. Add into that the fact that it's priced so affordably at under £11,000. And you've got to think that Triumph are going to be onto a winner here. Have they made the most sexy, most powerful motorcycle ever? No, but they've delivered to the market what it actually wants. It's going to be in UK dealerships as of March. Get yourself along, try it out for size and let us know what you think of it. But I dare say, if you have a ride like I did, you're likely to be impressed.